My name is Rachel Palmer. I am 37 years old, and last week I experienced a moment I could never have predicted. I was honored at a professional gala for my work in research and education. It was an event I had been waiting for weeks, a recognition for everything I had achieved over the years. But as fate likes to play tricks, the moment I entered the bathroom to take a deep breath, I came face to face with someone I had not seen in almost 15 years, my mother. She was standing in front of the mirror, reapplying her lipstick, impeccable as always. The same elegant posture, the same cold expression. For a moment, I thought she might not recognize me. But then her eyes moved up the mirror and met my reflection. Her hand froze in midair, and I saw her jaw tighten. "Rachel," she said, her voice distant, as if we were having a casual encounter at an elite club rather than a reunion after 15 years of silence. "I didn't expect to see you here." I held my purse tightly and kept my tone neutral. "I could say the same. What brings you here?" She turned to me, standing straight as ever. "Your father and I were invited, of course. We've always been involved with organizations that support education." I nodded slowly and said, without looking away, "I'm being honored tonight. For my work in research." I saw a flash of surprise pass through her eyes before she masked her expression. "I see," she said, looking back at the mirror. "I suppose everyone finds their way eventually." Her words instantly transported me back to the day I left that house for the last time. I was 19 and had already endured a lot. In high school, I struggled with depression, but in my family it was a forbidden topic. "What could you possibly have to feel this way?" my mother would say, her irritation evident. "You have everything, more than most kids your age. You're just making excuses." But the truth is, I was drowning. The pressure to be perfect, to live up to the Palmer family name, was suffocating. I tried to keep up, but my grades were plummeting. By senior year, I was barely holding myself together. To my parents, I wasn't a daughter who needed help. I was a disappointment. When I only got one acceptance to a community college, my father's fury was overwhelming. "This family has standards," he yelled that night, pacing back and forth as I held my acceptance letter. "You've done nothing but embarrass us. If you want to throw your life away, do it alone." And with that, I was kicked out of the house. I remember the weight of my backpack that night. It wasn't just the weight of the clothes inside, but the crushing weight of knowing I was alone. My parents didn't even come to the door to say goodbye. My mother sat on the couch, checking her phone as if I didn't exist. My father disappeared into his office. I was invisible, disposable. For the first few months, I slept on a friend's couch, trying to figure out what to do. Community college wasn't glamorous, but it was something I could control. I worked as a waitress to pay my own tuition, and when I finally saved enough money to rent a small studio apartment, I felt a glimmer of hope. I could breathe, even though the air felt thin. The first year was a blur of late-night studying and endless shifts. I chose chemistry not just because I liked it, but because I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe to them, that I could excel at something difficult. But it wasn't easy. My grades were average. I was always playing catch-up, but for the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of their opinions. I could just learn. I still remember my first chemistry exam. I spent weeks memorizing every formula, every reaction. When the teacher handed my paper back, I was afraid to look, but there it was, a 92%. I almost cried right there in the middle of the room. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I deserved it. It felt like the first small step toward rebuilding myself after everything had fallen apart. Plus, over the years, I've grown in ways I never imagined. College wasn't easy, but I learned to work for what I wanted. And the harder I worked, the more I saw myself grow. By the time I finished my associate's degree, I wasn't just a student. I was no longer someone just trying to get by. I had learned to fight for my place in the world. I transferred to a 4-year university, and while I still faced challenges, I learned to overcome them. I went from being a shy, insecure high school girl to someone who could explain complex concepts in front of a class, who could stand up for herself. Chemistry, once a challenge, became my passion. I didn't want to just pass. I no longer wanted to excel to prove that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. I still worked part-time, but I also began interning at local research labs, gaining experience that eventually led to an opportunity one never imagined, becoming a lead researcher at a nonprofit focused on advancing science and education. It wasn't just a job. It was my way of giving back, of creating a space where other kids, those who had been told they weren't good enough, could find their own path. Graduating with honors should have been a moment of triumph, but when it came time to celebrate, I realized something. My parents didn't call. Not to congratulate me, not to ask about my plans. Nothing. My father, who owned a huge fertilizer company, had more money than he knew what to do with it. My mother threw extravagant parties and hobnobbed with politicians and CEOs. But despite all their wealth, they never showed any interest in me, unless it was to criticize. Even after all I had accomplished, I didn't exist in their world. I was an inconvenient blemish on their perfect lives. It pains me to admit it, but I had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that they would at least acknowledge the effort I had put in. But no. To them, it was as if I had never existed. The only family member who showed up for my graduation was my Aunt Lydia, the black sheep of the family. Unlike my parents, she had always been kind to me. While they ignored me, she was the one who called on my birthdays. When I saw her in the audience, a lump formed in my throat. After the ceremony, she was waiting for me in the parking lot, holding a huge bouquet of flowers. "You did it, girl," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you. Imagine living your whole life feeling invisible, like nothing you did really mattered. Now, imagine taking the biggest step of your life, leaving everything behind and heading out to find your own future without knowing what awaits you." That's what happened to me. It all started with an application. I didn't know if I would make it. The process was rigorous, the requirements were too high, and I felt like I was about to fail. But then, weeks later, one random morning, an email changed my life. The message said, "We are delighted to inform you that you have been awarded a research grant for your proposed work in environmental chemistry at the University of Oxford." I couldn't believe it. I, an ordinary girl from a small town, had the chance to study at Oxford. It seemed like a dream, but it was real. And that's how I moved to England, without telling anyone. Not my parents, not my lifelong friends. The only person who knew was my Aunt Lydia. She was the one who gave me the push I needed. "Do it for yourself, Rachel," she told me. "You've worked too hard to let anything stop you." She understood. He understood why I needed to disappear, why I needed to escape the shadow of my past and start something new. I asked for only one thing. Don't tell anyone where I am. I didn't want anyone trying to find me. I didn't want the weight of their judgment holding me back. With a backpack on my back and a faint hope that this would be my chance to be who I had always dreamed of, I boarded a plane to Oxford. I didn't know what to expect, but I was ready to fight for it. The first few weeks were tough. The language, the culture, the isolation. But as I delved deeper into my studies, something inside me told me that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Environmental chemistry, which had previously been just a testing ground and exams, now made sense. I wasn't just studying to please my parents or pass an exam. I was working on something that could actually change the world. The years passed, and with each challenge I overcame, my dream seemed more real. I completed my master's degree, got my doctorate, and eventually was invited to become a professor at Cambridge University. That's right, Cambridge. The same university that I thought was unattainable. I, who before didn't even believe I could get to college, was now about to teach there. It seemed like a joke of fate. How did I get here? At Cambridge, I was finally able to teach, mentor, and shape the next generation of scientists. I was at my peak, but at the same time, there was still something eating away at me inside. I looked back at my past and wondered, does anyone anywhere still care about me? I hadn't heard from my parents since I left home. No calls, no sign of life. Did they even think about me? And then, at an event, as I was getting ready to give a talk, something happened. My mother showed up. Suddenly, there she was, all elegant, adjusting her lipstick in front of the mirror, as if nothing had happened between us. What bothered me most was not seeing her, but how she acted, as if everything I had done to get there had no value whatsoever. "Everyone finds their path eventually," she told me, with a distant smile. I, who had dedicated my life to being recognized, to proving myself capable, was here, being treated as if my journey was nothing more than a mistake from the past. I took a deep breath. The weight of that conversation, that presence, was suffocating me. But in that moment, something inside me clicked. I realized that I didn't need her approval or anyone else's. I had made my place in the world with my own hands. I was no longer looking for acceptance. I had built a life on my own terms. In that moment, I felt like the stage was set, the lights were shining, and the audience was waiting. I was finally ready to take my place, to be who I always wanted to be, without strings attached, without the weight of other people's expectations. And there, in the middle of that crowd, I knew that despite everything I had been through, everything I had achieved was because of me. And that was enough. Because in the end, the only approval that really matters is our own. The announcement was made. The stage was lit up, the room was completely silent, and my name rang through the air, echoing with a recognition I never imagined would come. Rachel Palmer, honored for her groundbreaking contributions to education and sustainable chemistry. The applause began to ring out, but to me it all felt distant, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold. I was there, but I wasn't really there. The spotlight shone on me, and for a moment, I felt my heart pound in my chest. This wasn't just about the work I had done in chemistry. This was deeper than that. This was my chance to finally show the world who I was. To show that I wasn't the person my parents had tried to make me believe I was. But as the moment unfolded, a sense of unease crept over me. There was something strange in the air. The host continued his speech, drawing everyone's attention. In recognition of Rachel Palmer's groundbreaking work, a generous anonymous donor has pledged a $2 million gift to support her research efforts. The room fell silent. All eyes were on me, and my heart raced even faster. $2 million, the amount hung in the air, almost surreal. But the gift wasn't meant for me. Not yet. I was processing everything, trying to make sense of what was happening when the host continued. This award will be given to the person who has demonstrated exceptional dedication to chemistry and education. I blinked, stunned by the enormity of the sum, the way it would change someone's life. But something still bothered me. I could feel a tension in the room, something I couldn't explain. And then, that's when I saw him. There, in the back of the room, near the exit, my father. He was standing, his expression contorted in disgust, his eyes meeting mine for a brief moment before he turned away and started walking toward the door. His steps were quick, as if he wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The man who rejected me, who threw me out of his home years ago, was walking away at the exact moment I was being recognized. He didn't even wait to see who was receiving the award. My chest tightened, a mixture of anger and disbelief washing over me. How could he be so cold? How could he turn and leave, knowing that the daughter he had discarded was now receiving everything he had never believed I was capable of achieving? As he walked away, the feeling of something wrong didn't leave me. Something wasn't right. But before I could process it, the announcer's voice echoed through the room again. And that was when the truth hit me, like a punch in the gut. This award, which includes a $2 million donation, was made possible by a contribution from a fertilizer company, Mosaic. I froze. The name of the company was familiar. Mosaic, my father's company. And in that moment, the irony hit home. The man who had rejected me, who had treated me as if I were an embarrassment to him, had funded the award I had just received. The weight of the truth crushed me. He didn't want to see me win, but his own company, the company he built, was now paying for mine. He couldn't stand to see me being recognized because he couldn't bear the thought that I, the daughter he'd scorned, had surpassed all expectations. But unbeknownst to him, he had been the key to my consecration. I was standing there, achieving everything I'd ever dreamed of, and he couldn't even look at me. The irony was cruel. The man who had rejected me, the same man who had disowned me for following a path that didn't fit the perfect image he'd projected for me, had unknowingly funded the very award that represented the greatest achievement of my career. The irony of it all was almost too much to process. It was more than I could bear at that moment. I stood there, stunned, as the announcer's words continued to echo in my ears. The applause around me was distant, as if I were hearing it all from underwater. The weight of what had just been revealed was pressing down on my heart, which was beating so hard in my chest that it felt like it was going to burst out of my mouth. For a brief moment, I couldn't process anything. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice almost shaking, but firm enough for everyone to hear me. The words seemed too small for what I was feeling, but I didn't have time to think about it. I needed to get out of there. I couldn't take any more of that recognition, which suddenly felt empty. I walked towards the exit without looking back. My steps hurried, my heart racing. Only one thought ran through my mind: my father. I knew he had left the room. I saw his twisted face, the mix of disgust and something else, before he turned and left. He left as soon as he heard about the award, without even bothering to wait to see who would be recognized. That tightened my chest in a way I couldn't explain. How could it be? The man who had thrown me out of his life was now running away from the one thing he couldn't control: my success. I pushed open the back door hard, trying not to lose the rhythm of my heavy breathing. When I looked outside, there he was, his back to me, the car parked. My feet began to move without me even realizing it, and before I could stop myself, I was running after him. "Dad!" I shouted, my voice almost breaking as my run quickened. He didn't turn around right away, his shoulders rigid, as if he wanted to continue ignoring my presence. When he finally turned around, his gaze was the same as it had been so many years ago, a gaze that carried the same contempt. "What is it now, Rachel?" he asked, his voice colder than ever. "Do you think I'm going to congratulate you?" I stopped just a few steps away, my heart hammering in my chest. He didn't know anything. He didn't know that I was the recipient of a scholarship. He believed he was just doing a good deed, donating money to some cause, not knowing that this money was going straight to my name. He smiled bitterly, mockingly. I don't know whether to be disgusted or impressed, but here you are, taking my money. I'm sure that's exactly what you wanted, right? I could see the resentment in his eyes, and what he didn't know was that the money he had donated meant nothing to me. It didn't matter what he thought. I didn't ask for this. I didn't even ask for his approval. I earned it all on my own, with my own hands. I never asked for your money or your approval, I replied, my voice firm. I earned this on my own, just like everything else. His eyes darkened and he shook his head. It doesn't change anything. You're still the failure I kicked out of my house all those years ago. No amount of scholarships or awards will change that. I felt a surge of anger, but I pushed it down. It didn't matter what he thought. I had already built my own life, and none of this would affect me. I had spent years trying to prove myself to him. Now, with all that I had accomplished, he was still there, bitter and resentful. But there was no point in arguing. The next day, I made a decision. Overnight, I reflected on what the $2 million donation meant to me. At first, it felt like a victory, a vindication. But as the night wore on, that feeling faded. It wasn't my victory. It was just another reminder of everything I had escaped. The money, which had once represented rejection, would now be part of something bigger. I gave it away. Every penny. I didn't want anything from it. Not with all the strings attached to his disdain. I wanted to use this money for something meaningful, to give opportunities to other students who, like me, had been overlooked, undervalued, and forgotten. The donation went to fund scholarships for underprivileged students. Those who, like me, needed a chance to build something for themselves without being crushed by other people's expectations. The money, which had once been tied to my father's bitterness and judgment, was now part of something bigger, something that would live on beyond the walls of that gala. As I pressed the donate button for the first time, a sense of calm washed over me. I no longer needed his money, his approval, or his recognition. I had built my own legacy, one that would live on far beyond what he could ever understand.